If you just finished eating and your very next move was to sit back down on the couch or back at your desk or in your recliner, you may have just made your blood sugar spike worse than the meal itself. Not because of what was on your plate, because of what you did in the 15 minutes after you put your fork down. Here's the part that surprises most people. This isn't just a problem for people with diabetes. If you're over 50, your body is already becoming less efficient at clearing sugar out of your bloodstream after a meal, even if your last blood test came back normal. Every single time you eat, your blood sugar rises. The question is how high it spikes, how long it stays up there, and what that's quietly doing to your blood vessels, your energy, and your risk of disease over the next 20 years. And there is one simple thing you can do right after you eat that changes that entire picture. It costs nothing. It takes less time than you think, and almost nobody explains it correctly. Stay with me until the end of this video, because I'm going to walk you through exactly when to do this, for how long, and this is the part your doctor almost never mentions, the one common mistake that can completely cancel out the benefit, even if you're doing the habit itself perfectly. Most people who've heard "take a walk after you eat" are still getting most of the value stolen from them without realizing it. I'll show you exactly how to fix that before we're done. I'm Dr. William Mercer. I've spent years in primary care watching the same pattern play out in patient after patient: normal fasting blood sugar, normal weight even, and yet their after-meal numbers were quietly climbing year after year. That gap is where a lot of long-term damage happens, and it's rarely talked about. I want to be upfront with you. I'm not here to sell you a supplement, a program, or a device. I don't have anything to sell you. What I do every week is go through the actual published research on metabolic health and translate it into plain language, so you can make decisions for your own body without needing a medical degree to understand why. That's it. That's the whole channel. So let's talk about what's actually happening inside you after a meal, because once you understand the mechanism, the rest of this is going to make a lot more sense. Here's what's going on in simple terms. When you eat, especially anything with carbohydrates, so bread, rice, pasta, fruit, even a lot of vegetables, your digestive system breaks that food down into glucose, which is just the medical word for sugar in your blood. That glucose gets absorbed into your bloodstream, and your blood sugar level rises. Doctors call this rise a postprandial spike. Postprandial simply means after a meal. Remember that word, because I'm going to use it a lot in this video. Your body's response to that spike is to release insulin, a hormone whose job is to unlock your cells, especially your muscle cells, so that glucose can move out of your blood and into storage. Think of insulin as a key and your muscles as a warehouse with a locked door. When the door opens, sugar gets moved off the busy highway of your bloodstream and into safe, quiet storage. The problem is, as we get older, that lock doesn't always turn as easily. This is called insulin resistance. The key still works, but it takes more effort, more insulin, and more time to get the same job done. That means glucose lingers in your bloodstream longer and higher after every single meal. And here's what most people get wrong. They assume a blood sugar spike is only dangerous if you're diabetic. It's not. Research has consistently linked those repeated after-meal spikes, even in people without diabetes, to inflammation and stress on the lining of your blood vessels over time. So the two words to remember for the rest of this video are postprandial spike and glucose highway. Everything I'm about to show you is really about one thing: getting sugar off that highway faster, using a method that doesn't rely on your body's insulin working perfectly. Here's the first thing almost nobody tells you. Your muscles can increase how much glucose they pull from your bloodstream through a pathway that doesn't rely on your usual insulin signaling if you use them. Let me explain what that means. When you contract a muscle, even something as simple as walking, that muscle needs fuel right away. And it has a shortcut. Instead of waiting for the normal insulin process, an active muscle can open its own doors and pull glucose directly out of your bloodstream to burn as fuel. It's like a vacuum switching on right at the exact moment your blood sugar is flooding in from your last meal. Think of your bloodstream after a meal like a river that's suddenly overflowing its banks. Insulin is one crew trying to redirect that water into storage tanks. But if that crew is a little slow or understaffed, which happens more as we age, the river keeps rising. Walking opens a second channel, a second crew, pulling that extra water away immediately before it can spill over and cause damage downstream. A 2022 study published in the journal Nutrients had participants take a brisk 30-minute walk after eating and compared their blood sugar response to simply sitting after the same meal. This was a controlled clinical study, with participants eating standardized meals, so the comparison was fair. The walking group showed a substantially lower glucose peak, and this held true whether the meal was higher or lower in carbohydrates. Separately, research out of Japan looking specifically at a short 10-minute walk taken immediately after eating found a measurable positive reduction in the after-meal glucose spike compared to remaining seated. I want to tell you about a patient of mine. I'll change her name for privacy. Let's call her Dorothy. She was 71, retired, and her after-meal blood sugar readings had been climbing for 2 years, despite her fasting numbers looking fine. We didn't change her diet at all to start. The only new habit was a 10-minute walk after her largest meal of the day. Within about 6 weeks, her post-meal readings had dropped meaningfully, enough that it changed the conversation about her long-term risk entirely. But what she actually mentioned to me first wasn't the numbers. It was that she'd stopped getting that heavy, foggy crash most afternoons after lunch, and she had more energy left over for the rest of her day. So, what should you do with this? After your next meal, don't sit down right away. Even 10 minutes of walking, around your house, down the driveway, around the block, engages that muscle vacuum effect before your blood sugar has the chance to climb to its peak. Here's where most people who've heard walk after meals actually get it wrong, and it's almost never about whether they walk. It's about when. Your blood sugar doesn't spike immediately when you finish eating. It typically climbs over the next 30 to 90 minutes as digestion continues. That window, 30 to 90 minutes after your last bite, is when your blood sugar is actively rising. And that is the window where a walk does the most good. Think of it like trying to catch a wave. If you paddle out too early, before the wave has even formed, you get nothing. If you wait until after it's already crashed onto the shore, it's too late to do anything with it. But if you paddle out right as it's building, you catch the full force of it. Walking before that window, or hours after it's already passed, still has some value for your general health, but it misses the moment where it can blunt the actual spike. Research comparing walking done immediately before a meal versus walking done in the 15 to 20-minute window after a meal found that postprandial, remember that word, walking was consistently more effective at controlling the glucose response, particularly around the evening meal, which tends to produce the largest spikes for most people. So here's the practical takeaway. You don't need to overthink the exact minute. A simple rule that works: finish eating, and within the next 20 to 30 minutes, get moving for at least 10 minutes. That's the window where your walk is doing the most work for you. Before I go further, I want to mention something, because this next part is genuinely the piece I promised you at the start, the mistake that can undo all of this. If you're finding this helpful, this channel is exactly this. One video a week, taking real research on aging and metabolic health and turning it into things you can actually use with no supplements and no sales pitch attached. If that's useful to you, subscribing means you won't miss the next one. Now, let's get into the part almost nobody explains correctly. But here's the part that surprised researchers the most. This mistake wasn't rare or occasional. It showed up again and again, even in people who were doing everything else right. Here's what I need to be very clear about, because I see this constantly, even in people who are doing everything right. You take your walk, good timing, good duration, and then, without realizing it, you undo most of the benefit by finishing the meal with something sweet as a reward, or sipping a sugary drink during the walk itself. A dessert, a sweetened coffee, a glass of juice. Here's why that matters so much. The muscle vacuum effect we talked about is working to clear the sugar that's already in your bloodstream from your meal. But if you introduce new sugar on top of that, during or right after your walk, you're refilling the river as fast as your muscles are draining it. The walk isn't broken. It's just been given a bigger job than it can finish in 10 minutes. This is the piece that almost never gets mentioned because it sounds so small. But it's the difference between a walk that meaningfully blunts your spike and a walk that barely moves the needle at all, while you walk away thinking the habit doesn't work for you. So what should you actually do instead? Keep the walk and the meal as a clean pair. If you want something sweet, that's fine. Just don't stack it right at the end of the meal or during the walk itself. Give your muscles the 10 minutes to do their job on the sugar that's already there before you add more to the pile. Here's some good news, because I know for a lot of you, a full workout after every single meal isn't realistic, especially with joint pain, fatigue, or just a busy day. You don't need one. Research comparing continuous walking to short, broken-up walking breaks, as little as 2 to 5 minutes every half hour, found the short, frequent approach was nearly as effective at blunting after-meal blood sugar as one longer, continuous walk. Think of it like turning a tap on and off in short bursts rather than leaving it shut the whole time and then blasting it open once. Frequent small bursts of movement keep that glucose door propped open throughout the window when your blood sugar is rising, rather than relying on one single effort to do all the work. I had another patient, I'll call him Robert, 76, retired from Arizona, who genuinely could not manage a full 10 or 15-minute walk after every meal because of a hip replacement. We switched him to simply standing up and walking to the mailbox and back a few times, spaced out over the hour after dinner. His readings still improved, not because the walk was long, but because it was frequent, and it landed in the right window. So the takeaway here, if 10 minutes feels like too much, don't skip it entirely. 2 or 3 short movement breaks, getting up, walking to another room, doing a lap around the kitchen, spread across the hour after your meal can do real work, even on days when a longer walk just isn't in the cards. Here's the last piece, and it's the one that actually determines whether any of this changes your long-term health or just makes for a nice one-off improvement. People often assume they need to walk faster or longer or more intensely to get a meaningful result. But the research doesn't support that. Light to moderate walking, a pace where you could still hold a conversation, has consistently shown meaningful reductions in after-meal glucose spikes. You are not training for a race. You are simply asking your muscles to open that door. What actually predicts whether this habit protects you over the next 10 or 20 years isn't the intensity of any single walk. It's whether you do some version of it after most meals, most days. Consistent, modest, repeated postprandial movement is what prevents that slow creep of insulin resistance we talked about earlier, not the occasional intense effort. So the synergy tip here is simple. Pick the smallest version of this habit that you know you'll actually do every day and start there. A 10-minute walk you do consistently will protect you more over years than an ambitious 30-minute walk you only manage once a week. Let's bring this all together quickly. First, walking after a meal activates a muscle vacuum effect, pulling glucose out of your bloodstream without relying on insulin. Research shows this can meaningfully blunt your after-meal spike. Second, timing matters. The 30 to 90-minute window after eating, when your blood sugar is actively rising, is when a walk does the most good. Third, watch for the hidden mistake. Adding sugar during or right after your walk can cancel out most of the benefit, even if your timing and duration were perfect. Fourth, you don't need a long walk. Short, frequent movement breaks throughout the hour after eating can be nearly as effective as one continuous walk. And fifth, consistency beats intensity. A modest walk you actually do after most meals will protect you more over time than an intense walk you rarely get around to. Before you go, I want you to think of one specific person. Maybe it's your spouse, who finishes dinner and heads straight for the recliner every single night. Maybe it's a parent living alone, who you worry isn't moving much after meals. Maybe it's a friend who's mentioned their blood sugar numbers have been creeping up at their last few checkups. This video might genuinely change something for them, not because it's complicated, but because it's simple enough that they'll actually do it. Send it to that person today, not as a favor to me, as something useful for someone you care about. Quick question for you before you go. What's your usual habit right after you finish eating? Do you get up and move, or do you tend to sit down? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. Before I let you go, I do want to say clearly, everything in this video is for educational purposes. It's not a diagnosis, and it's not personal medical advice for your specific situation. If you have diabetes, are on medication that affects your blood sugar, or have any condition that limits your ability to walk after meals, please talk to your own doctor before making changes, so they can guide you safely based on what's happening with your body specifically. My goal with this channel, every single week, is simply to take real research and hand it to you in a way that's useful, honest, and easy to act on. Here's a simple way to start. Try this after your next meal, every day for the next 7 days, and just notice how you feel. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.